Okay, so good morning. I am Claire Webb. I'm joined by Helen Savage. We are with you this morning to talk about kinship care and mediation. So today we are going to be focusing on a project that was run by us at Family Solutions that involved mediating with kinship care families. The project was funded by an organisation called Foundations, which is a new body which was formed by the amalgamation of the Early Intervention Foundation and What Works for Children in Social Care. The project was evaluated by Quorum. Kinship care, which most of you all know, is one, really, really important, but secondly, it's a really hot topic at the moment. The Law Commission are looking at it. It is generally viewed as an area that needs a lot of help and a lot of attention, and a lot of the families in the system aren't getting all the help that they maybe should have or could have or need. So there is a lot of eyes on it at the moment, looking at what could be improved. So the Law Commission started a consultation paper, which should be published in spring of this year, and they've been talking to various bodies, and some of you might have been involved. You may be aware that back in 2023, previous governments started an initiative, and this current government has continued it. There has been £40 million put into local authorities, and the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, which makes it legally that the local authority legally has to make offers with regards to kinship care. So there's lots and lots of work that's been going on in this area. So we're just going to talk about our very small part in that, which was just the pilot for mediating with these amazing families. So if we can move on. So we are Family Solutions. We're going to move straight on to the next slide, which just tells you a little bit about us, just so you get a little bit of flavour about how we got here. We started Family Solutions back in 2007. We are a Hampshire-based firm. We have offices in Southampton, Fareham, Havant, Emsworth, Petersfield and the Isle of Wight. For those of you up north, basically it means that we run along the bottom of the country for nice and easy. We get about 1,000 referrals a year. We mediate about 600 families. We get an awful lot of referrals from the local authority. We also get them from the court, CAFCAS, solicitors and other local agencies. We do offer legal aid, and legal aid has become absolutely vital in this offering. And it was something that enabled us to start the pilot, and then with the help of Foundations continue it. All of our mediators who took part in this are either members of member organisations of resolution or the FMA, and obviously are members of FMC and are all accredited and are all SIM mediators. So moving on. Just as an outline today, for those of you who are mediators, I'll apologise now because we are going to just talk very briefly about what is family mediation. That is because on this call there are people who are not mediators, and the pilot doesn't really make sense unless you've got a little bit of background. So if you want to snooze for a moment, if you're already a mediator, and drink your coffee, the next few slides will be about mediation. We're then going to move on to mediation process and the benefits, kinship care mediation and the actual project, which is the most important part of today, the evaluation that Quorum undertook, what the next steps are, and then we're going to have a little bit of time at the end for a Q&A. So messages in the Q&A, and we will do our very best at the end to answer them all, subject to time. So we will do our very best for you. So moving on. What is family mediation? So family mediation in a nutshell is it's voluntary, so you can't be made to do it. The mediator is neutral, so we don't have a view. We're not judgmental. We don't take sides. And it's confidential, safe for safeguarding. So as a lot of you on this call will know, it means that we can explore all sorts of areas without any fears. This was particularly helpful with the kinship, because it was what became very apparent was a lot of the work that they had done with all other professionals they knew would be going before the court. And so to have a safe space to have that conversation, as long as it wasn't about safeguarding issues, meant that for the first time they had that safe space to explore things. So moving on, who is family mediation for? So stereotypically, family mediation is known to be used for families who are going through divorce or separation. And very often mediators spend most of their time talking to parents and couples about either their finances or the arrangements for their children, or both, which we call all issues mediations. We may also do grandparents who come to talk about seeing their grandchildren if there's difficulties in the family. But when we looked at kinship, kinship took us one step further. So this was looking at any disagreements between any family members. And what we became very aware of is there is a very large cohort of children who don't live with their biological family. And a lot of these could be from situations where it might just be an agreement between the family and the local authority might not have got involved. It might be because the local authority have been involved, or it might just be an interim arrangement to give respite to the parents. So there was a lot of incidents that arose very early on, which made us aware of how important it was for this cohort to have mediation that was right for them. So moving on, the process. So the process is the individual appointments. So for mediation, we do it in exactly the same way. Sorry, my screen has just done something very funny, so I'm very sorry. So the individual appointments are the same in the project as well as in normal mediation. So we have individual appointments being the MIAM, not on the same day, normally about an hour to an hour and a half. Then we go into the joint sessions, as many as needed. And in mediation, they are arranged for times that are suitable to both people. And most people, we know from statistics, predominantly from legal aid, but slowly from the voucher scheme, that most people have 2 to 3 joint sessions. And mediation can be stopped at any stage by either party or by the mediator themselves. And it's really important that people have that ability, because it's really, really valuable for the autonomy of the mediation to be able to have that ability to say, this isn't suitable, we've tried it, we've done our best, and maybe this isn't the right process for us. Mediation can be in the same room or in separate spaces. It doesn't have to be just because of domestic abuse that it's in separate spaces. Some people just deal with things better, gives them more processing time, enables them to think and to be able to formulate responses in a more considered way. So there's lots of reasons for separate spaces. So moving on. So the benefits of mediation. So I always think probably the most obvious is that you're in control. As a person, you're not delegating control or responsibility of your life to another. It is confidential, safe for safeguarding, and that means that you can explore all sorts of different things. It saves money, so it is generally cheaper than going to court. In fact, I would say nearly always cheaper than going to court. And although on the slide it says it's cheaper than hiring lawyers, what we all hope is that you will use solicitors to give you advice behind the scenes and use that in mediation. It's less stressful. It's much nicer going to mediation, either offices or online, than it is going to court. Tailored solutions, it's all bespoke. So any mediation can be arranged to what suits the family better themselves. And you can use it to update existing agreements. I've got a lovely couple who come every August to update for the next year. They're really good at it. They just say they do it better when they're with me than when they try to do it themselves. So they just come once a year for an update for the next school year. And there's less conflict. It's better for children. It's better for children to know that mum and dad are speaking. So there's lots and lots of benefits for mediation. So moving on, we're going to come on to the Kinship Care Mediation project itself. And Helen's just going to talk a little bit about what the actual project involved.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. So Claire's just run through with you what sort of normal, bog standard mediation looks like. And I'm going to tell you about the Kinship Care Mediation project, which was just focused on kinship care families and which kind of added a few extra bits and pieces in. So we kind of called it like our sort of specialist mediation for kinship care families. So, like we've said before, the project was funded by foundations and evaluated by Quorum. So I'll tell you a bit about both. If we could just move on, please. Thank you. So if you want to find out more about the kinship care product program, then there is masses of information here. So if you just type in foundations, you will search under kinship care, you will find the intervention protocol, which gives details in sort of great detail about how we delivered it, what we needed to do, why we decided to do it, covers the theory of change. There's a logic model in there and some of the hoped for outcomes. So loads of information there if you want to find out a bit more about it. And then there is a report which is prepared by Quorum, which we'll run through quickly with you. But if you want to find out a bit more detail about it, then you will find it there. So all easily accessible if you're interested. And if you do think, actually, I might quite like to, if you're a mediator, you think I might quite like to mediate with kinship care families, you might find the details of the intervention bit is designed so that other people can read it and think whether or not they would like to deliver it themselves. So do have a look at that if you're interested. So next slide, please. So just running through exactly what we did. So first of all, we wanted to raise awareness of the project. So we decided that we would provide mediation awareness training for local professionals. So that's the local professionals who work across the south of England. So we did specialist training for them around standard mediation and then also around the offer that we had for kinship care families. So we worked with, well, we initially aimed for about 70 professionals. I think we actually did about 280 in the end because they were quite popular. So we just did 1 hour sessions online and people could come along if they wanted to. So that worked really well. And then the other thing that we did, so there's two parts of the project. The other bit was around providing this special, what we called specialist mediation for 20 kinship care families. So which is obviously where the kinship carer and then one or both biological parents attended the MIAM and then up to 4 joint mediation sessions. And also we tried to include a child consultation where appropriate, obviously not always appropriate, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but where we could, we tried to take the child's views into account. So next slide, please. So just to say who, for the purposes of the project, who did we say could come? So basically it was any family where there is kinship care at any stage. So any type of kinship care arrangement, didn't matter whether it was pre-order, post-order, they could come along at any stage. So that's what we aimed for, and I think we had quite a good spread over all the different types. Just if you could just move on, please. So just thinking about who the project was for and why we did kinship care families. So we work with kinship care families partly because we found with previous work that they were more likely than some other families we were involved in to make decisions about the children that were positive and that were helpful, whereas some other families we'd worked with in the child protection process had found it harder to make some decisions. So that was a really positive thing. That's why we chose to focus on kinship care families. And then also, of course, because there's lots of extra additional issues. So Kinship carers might be looking after children who have lots of additional issues, probably experience of trauma, maybe some more mental health issues. So obviously, lots and lots of extra unique issues which are relevant to kinship care families. And we've just got a little video here, which I'm going to ask Julie to play, which just explains some of the sort of background to kinship care and why kinship care families are so important and need lots of support. So Julie, if you're okay to play that. Thank you.
You can't really do much about the family you're born into. You know, like if your dad runs off before you can remember him and it rips your mum to bits and she spins out on a bender drinking and taking other stuff and forgets to leave the key under the brick or put food in the fridge or stop shouting at 2 a.m. on a school night. You can't do much about any of that, about your mum unravelling and that. Then one day a social worker comes and takes you away for your own safety. But you never said you didn't feel safe and you promised to take care of her and now you've let her down. And anyway, the social worker, they don't even know where they're going to take you. They just put you in the car and drive you away from your mum. With me, anyway, they thought, let's give her auntie a whirl. They roll up to her front door and explain the mess. She looks at me and I get the feeling that she don't know if she can do it, but thinks that if she says no now, if she says I can't fit her into my house, into my life and my other kids' lives, then the social worker will take me away for good. She won't see me again. She gets that idea anyway. And as well, I suppose she knows that right then and there, she's all I've really got. I'm still in my pajamas and don't have a toothbrush or my school uniform, but she takes me in and wraps me up. The social worker goes and now she's got a kid sat there in the kitchen and there's nothing she can do about it. I'm a lot to take on. I've got to admit I wasn't the easiest. What with worrying that my mum doesn't love me, what with thinking about her and my dad all the time and getting that hole in my middle that won't go away unless I bounce off the walls and lash out and explode and tie myself up in hundreds of knots. And all the time tangling my auntie up too, pulling on her until she falls apart. All she can do is take me out, but she can't because she loves me and that. She gives up her job, she gets a loan, she explains to her kids why she's on a short fuse, she watches other perfect families going on holiday, she does visits with my mum who doesn't always turn up, she washes my socks and she sorts out going to court and the legal orders, even though legal orders are pretty stressful, seems if she makes a mistake on them, they would screw up my entire life forever in that. She's exhausted, she's done in, and there's nothing more she can do. Except one night, when everyone else was watching telly, we took out her phone and we started to look. And looking was doing something. Looking led to chatting, to getting support, to getting advice, to seeing and hearing that what she was doing, other people were doing too. That it was something to be proud of. That she was a kinship carer. And it helped her slowly put herself back together and roll herself back up and have the energy to keep loving someone like me. And that love, well, it's probably saved my life. And that's not nothing, is it? Like I said, you can't do much about the family you're born into, but I'm glad I was born into one that had my auntie in it.
Thanks, Julie. Brilliant, thank you. So I hope that video shows to people who don't have as much experience of kinship care and working with kinship care families how important they are and how many sort of really unique issues that they have to deal with. And one of the things we really wanted to do with then is using mediation to support them. So say, for example, you have a kinship carer with a SGO, with a special guardianship order, who still has to work with the biological parent of the child. Often, obviously, their own biological child is a biological parent. They have to manage contact arrangements, and they've got social services. Obviously, the local authorities still saying to them, "You've got to protect this child," but they've got the mother of the child saying, desperate to see their own child, and it's just really, really difficult. So we really wanted to do something which made a difference there. So we developed this idea around specialist kinship care mediation. If you just move on to the next slide. Thank you. So what we decided to do is that we would want to do basic mediation, but we also wanted to provide some extra support. And one of the reasons we did this is because we knew, and I've just got a little statistic here, about that mediation is successful in resolving over 70% of cases, which is from the Family Mediation Council survey in 2019. So mediation is brilliant. It's hugely successful. But there was some research by a lady called Liz Trinder at Exeter University, who said that while mediation provides really good results in terms of resolving defined issues like contact, it does very little to help resolve the underlying issues between the parties and improve communication. So what we might see then is people coming back either to court over and over again in a loop about the children, or stuck in sort of intense conflict, which of course we know is highly damaging for children. So we got some funding from foundations to deliver this project, and we added a few extra bits and pieces in. So if you could move on, Julie. Lovely. So what we decided to do is that we would do this kinship care mediation, but we would provide additional support for the kinship carer and the parents or the grandparent or other grandparents, whoever else was involved, on the impact of conflict on children. So helping them understand why ongoing and unresolved conflict is very significant and damaging for children. That we would do some stuff around communication and managing conflict. And that where appropriate, we would look at and give them extra support around parenting skills and techniques. So what we did is, because we had this funding, we were aware that, well, lots of mediators will sort of, touch on this sort of stuff anyway. We were concerned that the detail this would go into might not be completely covered by legal aid. So that's why we got the funding to do the extra work. And also, obviously, there's a concern sometimes that kinship carers are less likely to be eligible for legal aid because they often have a slightly higher income. So that's why we got this funding, which was fantastic, hugely supportive. If you could just move on. And I'm just going to hand over to Claire, who's going to tell you a little bit more about how the project actually worked with the families.
So we followed very much the mediation model. So we started off with a MIAM. The only difference for this was often that there were several MIAMs instead of two. So what we found was that there would be the kinship carers, which we had naively thought in the beginning we would be able to do together, but actually, even when they were husband and wife, grandparents, grandma and granddad, they often had very different views of what was going to happen. So we learned very, very quickly that actually you couldn't even put the special guardians together. So we had MIAMs for everybody individually. So we would do the MIAMs for the guardians. We would then do the biological parents. Often we found that there were also the grandparents on the other side. So if the special guardians were the maternal grandparents, you would often find that there were also the paternal grandparents to also be seen. And sometimes there were more than two biological parents. So you might have mum and two dads, for example. So we became very aware very quickly that it was really important to spend time and make sure that the MIAMs were done really, really thoroughly and really well, so that we could then plan the journey as to how the mediations would take place and who would be present at the time. Because what we didn't do, and we never did, was put everybody in the room together or even on separate screens together. So we found that what worked the best was things like working with the for example, if it was the maternal grandparents who had the special guardianship order, then doing a mediation with the paternal grandparents would work really well. Then we could work with maybe a biological parent and then another biological parent. But the issues of putting people together had to be really carefully thought through. And particularly because this cohort has a lot of domestic abuse, we had to be very, very mindful about putting biological parents together, because often that's where the abuse was. So it would be more than likely to be the SG and the for example, maternal grandparents with the special guardianship order, and maybe daughter, who would be the biological mum, having a mediation, and then doing dad separately if there had been any domestic abuse in those situations. So there was a lot of work that came into it. So although it says 20 families, it actually ended up being quite a few separate sets of mediation within those families, all being offered 3 to 4 sessions of an hour and a half, and possibly a child consultation depending on the age of the children, and also how much intervention there had already been. So if those children had seen every single professional going, then we had to be very mindful about what we were then considering. So moving on, session 1 was very similar to what a lot of you would feel for a normal mediation. So signing the agreement to mediate, obviously there were a lot more people involved. Ground rules, we had lots of ground rules because of the fact that there were lots of other people involved, and hopes and expectations, and spent a lot of time understanding the background, because these are complex families with, as I say, often several biological parents involved, and several sets of grandparents involved. We spent a lot of time in session 1 educating the participants about the negative impact of conflict on children. So we did a lot of discussion about ACEs, not scaring them, because if you just do ACEs in harsh black and white, it's quite terrifying, but talking to them about how that conflict does affect children and how we can improve, and how we can change our behaviour to reduce that impact on children. We also spent a lot of time, and this was something that was really, really valuable and came out in the evaluation as one of the things that the participants found the most useful, was spending time thinking about how they were going to communicate. Because what tended to have happened is it tended to be a little bit dysregulated. So as you saw in that video, you have a guardian who either may be an older person, so they might be a grandparent who suddenly has children in their house. They may be an aunt or an uncle who then has to have children with their own children. So you can imagine how many children some of these guardians have in their home. And so planning time to communicate was something that was really valuable, so that it wasn't off the cuff, and it therefore became a less of a throwaway reaction, and it had real thoughts. And we used what we call the halt signs, which is just taking a breath and thinking about how you're going to communicate, and so that you just slow things down, I think, is probably the best way of just talking about it. And then, as I said, child consultations where appropriate. We had to consider these. We had hoped at the beginning that we would do a lot more. What actually became very evident was, save for the later teenagers, so I'm talking about 13, 14, 15-year-olds, a lot of the younger ones, it wasn't suitable, mainly because they had been through the care process and had had guardians, had a lot of professional intervention, and were for the first time settling down. And I think the general feeling was it wasn't appropriate to do child inclusive at that point. The older ones still, because they were much more aware of what was going on, were still very comfortable with it. But the younger ones, it was felt it wasn't quite as... We found that the 10 threshold that we tend to look at was quite young for children in these situations. And then obviously mediation of current issues. So all the normal things that we all see, late to handovers, feeding inappropriate food, giving Haribos 5 minutes before you return them, all of those things that we all talk about all the time. So moving on, the next slide takes us to session 2, which was the child consultation generally. And this meant that we had an opportunity of seeing the children. As I said, for the older children, this was really valuable, because what we found was a lot of the older children still had stuff they wanted to share. So they knew that the care proceedings were over, they knew that the court proceedings were over, but they still had lots of things that they wanted to share about what could make things better, what could improve the situation from them. Same rules as normal child inclusive mediation. If they told us something safe for safeguarding concerns, as always, then we didn't have to share it. And sometimes they just wanted to talk. They wanted to talk about how it felt, whether it was good, whether it was bad. But what we did find was all of them wanted us to feedback. We didn't have any child who didn't want us to feedback fully. So it was all with their permission, in the same way as you would do in a traditional child inclusive. And the children were pretty incredible, I have to say. All our mediators are CIM, and we all have enhanced DBS checks. So moving on. So I've talked mainly about this slide. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. So it was very much for the children to talk about their hopes and expectations. It was a really important part, especially for some of the biological parents, to hear what they could do better and how they could improve very, very small things that would improve the impact on their children. And a lot of those tended to be around things like turning up on time, being consistent, not shouting at the guardians, very little things that when we talked about the communication and what Helen was talking about earlier about how you communicate and the work that we put in around conflict, that really helped. So we did quite a lot of work around, just that meet and greet. We did some role plays of making people, talk about how they were going to hand over. So they would say, hello, it's really nice to see you. Thank you for bringing so and so. And how they were going to deal with that, just in really small bite-sized amounts. So moving on. Session 3, we spent a lot of time on communication in session 3. And for those of you who know iMessages, you will know how powerful these are. For those of you who aren't sure what an iMessage is, it's a reframe. So it's from you are at fault, you're the problem, to I. So for example, you never listen to me when I'm talking. That makes it sound quite hostile. It puts someone's back up. It immediately sounds accusatory. But if I said, I feel unheard when I'm speaking, and it's really important to me that we both are listened to, then that feels more inclusive. So we did a lot of work on iMessages so that people could understand and actually really hear. And it sounds really cheesy to say, but just going back to basics of actually listening to each other, not answering, but listening, and then reflecting back on what you've heard, not what you think and what you want to say, but just what have I heard. And we did a lot of work on that. And what we know from a lot of the biological parents is they felt for the first time that they were heard. It didn't mean that the guardian had to agree with them, but they did have to hear how hard it was for that person at that time. So the communication work, I think, was probably one of the biggest moves for how they then moved forward, because a lot of the people that we saw, and although we saw some pre-order, we had quite a few who were post-order. And for those of you who've seen these orders, they tend to say contact arrangements as agreed, which is great if you get on and really difficult if you don't. So these communication skills were so important, so that the biological parent felt heard and not banging their head against a brick wall, but so that the guardians didn't feel that actually what happens is at 7 o'clock in the morning, I get a random text and say, I want to see them at 3. And, they're not out of school by then, or they've got a club, or actually I've got 3 other children to collect. And so it was all about the communication. So moving on, session 4 was about how to do conflict management. So we did a lot of work around 10 steps to conflict management. We use a really great tool that gives them an opportunity to practice. So when you do this with them, don't choose an issue that they genuinely have, otherwise it will unravels very, very quickly. We always chose something that they weren't an issue about. So something like, would you allow a child to see an 18 when they're 10? That's a movie, so that it's very clear that we're all saying that we wouldn't agree, but we can all take different parts. And what we practiced was, if you have a conflict, how are you going to work through it? How are you going to get to a resolution? We also you talked about the destructive patterns of behaviour and used John Gottman's stop signs, which is how we all use them. We all do it all the time. It ruins all relationships. So it's scoring points, thinking the worst, opting out, and putting down. And when I say that, all of you will know which one you're particularly good at. We're all good at some of them. And then my favourite part of the whole work was the goals for our children. This was a lovely way of bringing it all together. So we talked about very aspirational things of what do we want for the children? What do we want to come out of this? Not specifics about I want 2 hours more time with them, but what we want. Do we want them to go to university? Do we want them to do a job in the arts? Do we think they're really creative? Do we think they're really musical? All of those lovely things that actually brings people into a really positive ending. And obviously continuing mediation as to the more everyday things that naturally come up for all children in mediation. So moving on, no great surprise, the types of decisions which were made were how they saw each other. Bear in mind with all of this, because we're under the parameters of court orders and the local authority, it's not like mediation where two parents come in and say we need to sort out the arrangements. We had very strict parameters. So it might have been that we had been told by the local authority that all contact had to be supervised. So everybody who arrived would know that. The parents would know it, the guardian would know it. So when we say the types of decisions that were made, they were always within the umbrella of what either the court had said or that the social services straight local authority had in their care plan. So it might be, for example, one of the ones which was lovely Christmas before last was we were in a situation with supervised contact, and we managed to move the supervised contact so that they could go to the local garden centre, which had a Santa. And so the supervised contact could be that they went through the grotto, they went to Father Christmas. So they're the kind of plans that we set in place so that you're still within the confines of what is acceptable to the local authority. And then other things were behaviour, education, medical consent, because that was quite scary for parents, because although they're told that the special guardian will have the right to make decisions because they'll have more parental responsibility, the actual reality of that. So we had somebody who was very against vaccinations and the guardian was very pro. So those kind of things gave them an ability to have those discussions. Support for the child, looking at counselling services, support for the adults, obviously, counselling, drug assessments, alcohol assessments, parenting classes. We found some really good charities locally who did fabulous free courses for parenting, and then routines. Good old routines. We all mediate on routines all the time. What time's bedtime? What should you feed them? Pizza every day isn't going to cut it. Those kind of conversations. As I said earlier, adult goals for the children. And then problems with implementing the court orders. These are no different than all of the mediators on this call will have had. The only difference is it's sometimes a little bit harder for the biological parents because they're often stricter than we see for mum and dad. So they often have much more, a lot more no's in there. So you have to be supervised. You can only be 4 times a year. You can only be this. And that's quite hard for the biological parents when they're saying, well, actually, I want to see them weekly. And you're saying, well, we've got a court order that says you can see them quarterly. So, we're within the court precinct. So moving on to the next slide, Helen is just going to talk to you about the short-term outcomes.
Lovely. So this is what we were aiming to achieve. So some of the short-term outcomes that we were hoping the project would support. So we aimed, really, we kind of designed the sessions around these outcomes. So kinship carers and parents feel confident and safe to communicate honestly to each other during mediation sessions. So that was kind of one of the aims. That there was an improvement in communication between the kinship carer and the parent outside of the session. So that's why we added all the extra stuff in around communication and managing conflict. That kinship carers and parents would make decisions taking the child's views into account. So again, very important then to have the child consultation where possible so that the children's views would be specifically taken into account. When I say taken into account, it doesn't mean they do exactly what the children say. It's just that they understand what their views are, and then they make a sort of an adult decision as to what is appropriate and what isn't. And then also another short-term outcome, excuse me, was kinship carers and parents are better able to engage in future-focused discussions and problem solving. So rather than being pulled back into the emotion of everything that's happened, that we're better able to look at the future and how we're going to move forward. And that kinship carers and parents have a better understanding of appropriate behaviour and parenting techniques and the effect of trauma and conflict on a child. So just a little bit of an enhanced understanding around the impact of what might have happened in the past. So having a little bit of look around trauma-informed parenting techniques, thinking about the impact of conflict on a child or ongoing and unresolved conflict on a child, which hopefully encourages everybody, all the adults in the child's life, to focus on getting on a bit better. So those are the short-term outcomes that we hope to achieve. And then if you could move on to the next slide, Julie. Thank you. So this was the hoped for long-term outcomes, and actually Quorum, our evaluators, couldn't test those obviously because they were long-term. But in the long run, we were hoping that it would mean there would be reduced levels of conflict between the parent and carer, increased cooperation, that hopefully the kinship carers would feel less stressed because of the reduced conflict, that there would be more collaborative, predictable and consistent parenting approaches from the kinship carer and the parent. So where the parent did have contact, that they were able to run similar routines in each house, for example. So not the difference between going to bed at 7 or 7:30, but the difference between going to bed at midnight and going to bed at 7. So more predictable routines and things and approaches so that the children felt more stable. That the kinship child would feel more settled in the home where they live, so with the kinship carer. That more children would grow up in well-supported kinship care placements with hopefully fewer disruptions and breakdowns, and fewer children return to the local authority. And then children where the birth parents are unable to care for them safely have the best possible health, education and employment outcomes. So those are the hoped for long-term outcomes that we were hoping to achieve, but obviously they couldn't be tested because they're long-term. So Julie, if you could just move on. Thank you. So these are the actual outcomes that the Quorum reported. So what they were doing was they were doing a feasibility study into the project. So they were working out whether or not it was feasible to evaluate the project in the long term. So a very complicated process as far as we're concerned. But these are the outcomes that they reported. And again, the report is, I don't know, about 80 pages long. It's really long. So if you want to have a look at it, you'll find it on the Foundation's website. So Quorum report said there was evidence of improved communication and cooperation between carers and birth parents, that there was greater clarity and predictability in contact arrangements, shared rules and routines. And then they took some information from feedback from the referring professionals, obviously the local authority, who said they had observed improved cooperation, greater emotional relief for families, clearer roles and expectations post-mediation. And also Quorum mentioned the training which we provided to the professionals, which was well received, increasing understanding of mediation and increasing confidence in referrals. So that was the sort of generic outcomes, but if you want a bit of bedtime reading, you can read them in great detail on the report on the website. Just moving on, please. So the other bit is just to quickly say about the importance of the mediation for the biological parents, or the birth parent. So um, obviously you could take the view that people come at it. It's sort of a bit of a power imbalance because the kinship carer has all the power, but actually the people, I think some of the people who benefited most were the birth parents. So it felt for them that it was the first time that they'd ever been heard properly. Doesn't mean they got their own way, but somebody was available and there to listen to them, and that the kinship carer was encouraged to listen to their views. Again, it didn't mean they were going to act on them, but they were encouraged just to listen. So these are just some of the quotes from interviews with biological parents. So the top one was just, I think it was absolutely fabulous. The next one was, when you're not getting on well, you've got that person in the middle, like probably Claire, name of mediator. So like the mediator, she was calm in the situation. I said to her, I'm not going to talk to him, the kinship carer. He's got no respect for me. In the end, I said, so this was after the mediation first session. I said, add him to the call and we can talk about everything. And he was happy, I was happy, and that was it. And then the next person said, it is a very safe chat with support around you. There's no judgment, and you know everyone has their past and things like that. And it didn't even feel like I had to hide any of that past, if that makes sense. So despite the fact you might think a bit of a power imbalance in the mediation, absolutely transpired this was not the case, and it worked really well for biological birth parents. So that's just, it's really important to take from that. Okay, next slide, please. Right, over to you, Claire.
So one of the things that I think we were really, really proud of that came out of the evaluation and the report was that Quorum said that the MIAM should be considered a standalone intervention. And it was really important, not only for the kinship care pilot, but for mediation itself, because I think a lot of us feel that the MIAM is a standalone intervention. It is really valuable. And the feedback that we had from participants was that it was really valuable, even if it did not go into mediation. So there were some that just did not go into mediation for all sorts of reasons. But we still did the MIAM, and providing that information, doing the signposting, giving guidance and listening, really listening, means that those MIAMs were really, really valuable. And one of the biological parents said, I just felt heard for the first time. I think that's the beauty of this safe environment for me to say how I feel, because I don't feel I've been able to in any other instance apart from this one. And it is amazing that we had so much feedback about that as far as the MIAM was concerned. And it really just, I think it hit home to all of us in Family Solutions, but I think for all of us in the mediation world, I think we know that a MIAM is so valuable. And I think sometimes those outside of mediation maybe devalue it a little bit. So it was something I was really pleased that Quorum picked up on. So moving on, if we can, the recommendations of the report. So the recommendations that came from the pilot were that we should all be raising awareness and debunk misconceptions about mediation, refer families earlier in their kinship care journey, provide more support for birth parents to increase engagement. This was because we found that this cohort found it very difficult to engage, especially after an order that gave them very little time with their children. So the less time that they were going to have with their children post order, the less engagement that we had. So for people who were still having weekly time with their children, they were still quite engaged. We had a couple that were only allowed indirect, say for once a year, and it was very hard for them to engage because they felt that they'd lost everything. Strengthen multi-agency training and knowledge about mediation. That was something that Helen and I particularly really enjoyed. Getting people in the local authority to really understand what we were doing and why, and what they do, because I don't think we really understood exactly what they were doing right at the beginning. So that was really valuable. Offer comprehensive mediator training and supervision. and consider follow-up sessions to help sustain the progress. What we all felt was that 4 sessions wasn't enough. We felt that we had got them to a place that was better, and I think all of us felt that if we could have offered some sessions maybe 3 months down the line to just check in with them and make sure that they were still doing all the good stuff that we had gone through, then that would have been really, really valuable. But as with everything, it's funding, isn't it? So next steps, next slide, please. We would love mediators to take on board what Quorum found. We think that this is such an amazing area, and these are amazing people and amazing families. So we would love other mediators to think about how they can build on Quorum's recommendations. We are still building on them now. If you are interested in any way, then we can talk to you about it in more detail. So if you are inspired this morning, I do appreciate it was a 9 o'clock slot, so you might not be that inspired. But if you are inspired, then do give us a shout, because we would love to speak to mediators who want to work in this area. We are continuing to train both mediators and local authorities. We've just taken on a new local authority last week who are brilliant and really, really open to it. And our goal is to slowly educate every local authority as to what mediators can offer. And although the funding with foundations isn't there at the moment, they're hoping that it might return, but there's other pressing needs for their money. We do have legal aid, we do have the voucher scheme, so there are things that we can do. Some of the local authorities do have a little bit of money that they will help, so there's all sorts of things that we can do. So that brings us, if you can just move on to the last slide, sorry, Julie. That brings us to the end. There is only one question in the question and answer. Michael, thank you. I really do appreciate it, because it's a really good question, and it was one that really concerned us when we first took this on. So the question that Michael asked was, what are your criteria for breaching confidentiality and reporting a safeguarding concern? Who do you report it to, and how often have you had to do so? So it was a concern that we had, that we thought, are we going to be doing this a lot? But actually, it was very, very little, because of course, they're all coming with knowledge of what those safeguarding issues were, and the child has already been removed. So it's really interesting that actually our safeguarding role was actually probably less than it is in a normal mediation MIAM, where maybe people are doing things that they shouldn't, whereas this, if you like, they're in the spotlight. They have local authority involvement, they have a guardian who is very, very aware by that point that they are responsible for that child's well-being. And so the safeguarding issues are very out there right from the beginning. The only thing that we did do is we made a very clear in the MIAM to everyone that if anything was said, then because they did have social workers, we would have to report it to the caseworker, because unlike a normal report where you just report into the local authority, we already knew that the family were being assisted. But actually, we didn't have to. Hi, Rebecca. Not a question, however, this is also very helpful. Would love to discuss more. I'd love to talk to you, Rebecca, about it. No, Charlotte, this wasn't mainly court ordered. We had some and some. So we had quite a few pre-order, which we found in the evaluation actually were better because we got to them earlier, and therefore we helped the parents and the guardians navigate the system better and understand each other's boundaries. Whereas those that were court ordered, we got them after, and they had been quite bashed and bruised by then. And so there was a lot of distrust. And one of the families in particular, I remember, and I wish we had had them earlier. We did get there and it was a beautiful situation in the end, but paternal grandma and maternal grandma put themselves forward to be assessed as the guardian, and maternal grandma was chosen. Paternal grandma felt that therefore she had lost. And so we did a lot of mediation about actually your role is to support maternal grandma and you can still be heavily involved. And that was amazing. But I wish we'd had them before the order had been made, because then they might have been on that same page for a year before. So
I think the other thing to add to that, Claire, is that the earlier that we get them, often the better, because the birth parent is still engaged in the process. So pre-order, birth parent is still, local authorities in touch with the birth parent, but often post-order, because obviously the funding goes where the child is. So often post-order, they've lost contact with the birth parent, and then it's hard to encourage them to come in. And if they do ask them to come in, that can be quite frustrating for the birth parent, because they think, well, why should I do anything that you've told me to, that you're telling me to? So earlier the better. Sorry, Claire.
Really important question from Cheryl. Legal aid and post order. No, there isn't a problem. And the reason there isn't a problem is because the order that is made by the court is in the care proceedings that says there's a special guardianship order to X, and as a throwaway sentence that always says contact to be agreed. What tends to happen by the time you've got them is contact isn't agreed, and they're having World War III over contact not being agreed. And the only avenue that the birth parent has is to make a C100 application, which then brings them back into the legal aid eligibility loop. That means that you can work with them. So I hope that helps with regards to eligibility. Ursula, my email address is Claire, CLAIRE, at familysolutionsnow.co.uk. It's also all over the stuff on the website for the FMC. I'm going to run out of time, I think, because there's suddenly loads of questions. Thank you, Sarah. I don't need to answer that one. Sorry, I can't read quickly enough. Absolutely, it's all about funding. It's so heartbreaking, isn't it? Because we all know we could do such a better job if somebody gave us a little bit more money. And I think that goes for this area, mediation generally. Graham, hi. I'm glad that you're here as a social worker. I'm really glad that you've come. Please give us a shout. Let us know which area you're in, because if you would like us to come and do some training for your area, Graham, just give us a shout. Helen and I love doing the training. So please just shout. And then the last one that I will do, so I don't get in trouble for running over, is the contact centre. Yeah, we use contact centres. They were absolutely an invaluable tool. So thank you. Thank you ever so much. We've got 1 minute to go, so I won't get told off by Julie at the FMC for overrunning. Thank you so much for all your time this morning. If there are any questions, Helen and I would love to answer them. So please email us and we will come back to you. Or if you'd like to arrange a time for a chat, or you would like us to do some training, then we love doing it. And we love meeting people who think this is such a valuable area. So thank you so much for your time today.